March 9, 1987. Record stores across Britain open at midnight to accommodate the crowds lined up outside. They're waiting for an album by four Irishmen who've spent the last year wrestling with death, politics, and their own mythology. Within 48 hours, The Joshua Tree sells 300,000 copies in the UK alone, the fastest-selling album in British history. In America, it debuts at number 7, the highest debut for a studio album in nearly 7 years. 3 weeks later, it hits number 1 and stays there for 9 consecutive weeks. But this isn't a story about commercial success. It's a story about how an album was forged in the crucible of grief and disillusionment. About 4 musicians who fell in love with an idea of America, then traveled to Central America and saw the cost of that love. About a roadie's death that hung over every session. About producers who nearly erased the album's biggest song out of frustration. The year before the Joshua Tree's release, Bono would describe his experience as an incredibly bad year. His marriage was strained. The band felt creatively uncertain. And in July 1986, tragedy would strike in a way that would fundamentally alter the album taking shape in their hands. "That's why the desert attracted me as an image," Bono told Melody Maker. "That year was really a desert for us." The story begins in 1985, during U2's Unforgettable Fire Tour. For months, the band crisscrossed America in tour buses borrowed from country stars, complete with decorative cow horns. As they drove through the American heartland, they read Southern Gothic author Flannery O'Connor and Norman Mailer. They filled themselves with American literature, American landscapes, American myths. There's 2 Americas. There's the mythic America and the real America, Bono would later explain. "We were obsessed by America at the time. America's a sort of promised land for Irish people, and then a sort of potentially broken promised land." The Edge recalled their fascination. "We wanted the idea of a one-piece record, not a side 1, side 2 thing. They were searching for something cinematic, something that could capture the vast open spaces and contradictions they saw in America." Their previous album, The Unforgettable Fire, had been a critical success but represented ambient experimentation that left some fans puzzled. U2 had never had a top 10 album in America. Their biggest US hit, Pride in the Name of Love, had only reached number 33. Despite being heroes in Ireland and the UK, mainstream American success had eluded them. The working title for their new album was The Two Americas. In January 1986, U2 set up an unconventional recording space in Danesmoat House, a Georgian mansion in the foothills of Ireland's Wicklow Mountains. They wanted to escape the clinical perfection of traditional studios. Producers Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois joined them, implementing an unusual tag team approach. Lanois remembered their strategy. "Eno and I had decided to go in at different times. Eno did a week or 2, and I went in and did a week or 2. We did that on purpose. We said, you go in and do some work with them, and then I'll go in and work with them, and we'll see what we've got." The band converted the grand dining room into a control room with tape machines and mixing desks, replacing massive double doors with plexiglass screens, so the elegant drawing room could become their live recording space. Engineer Mark "Flood" Ellis was brought in after impressing the band with his work on Nick Cave's The Firstborn is Dead. Lanois arrived carrying a tray of tea, a deliberate gesture to show he was still in the trenches as the tea boy, despite his growing reputation. The atmosphere was relaxed, creative, intentionally domestic. But the songs weren't coming easily. One song in particular seemed cursed. With or Without You had originated from a rough demo in late 1985, with Bono composing the chord sequence at drummer Larry Mullen Jr.'s house. But after months of work, The Edge considered it awful. The track was overly sentimental, the chord progression repetitive. They tried different arrangements, different tempos, different approaches. Nothing worked. Bono and his friend Gavin Friday kept working on it even after Eno and Lanois gave up. Then fate intervened. Canadian musician Michael Brook had invented something called the infinite guitar, a modified instrument with a magnetic device that allowed notes to sustain indefinitely. Brook had collaborated with The Edge on the 1986 film soundtrack for The Captive, and he sent The Edge a prototype. When the prototype arrived at the studio, The Edge plugged it in and began experimenting. Lanois recalled, "We were just fascinated with this new device. The Edge immediately recorded a part in 2 takes. That was it. It was not labored over. The 2 tracks he initially played made it to the finish line. The infinite guitar created ethereal shimmering tones that sounded almost like a theremin, a continuous high-pitched wail that gave the song its haunting, otherworldly quality. It was the sound they'd been searching for. But manager Paul McGuinness thought the song was too sonically unusual for radio. Gavin Friday disagreed, predicting it would be a certain number 1. Friday would be proven right. On July 3, 1986, Greg Carroll was riding a motorcycle through Dublin's rainy streets. The 26-year-old New Zealander had become far more than just U2's roadie. He was family. The band first met Carroll in August 1984 during their unforgettable Fire tour in Auckland. Suffering from jet lag, Bono had gone out walking in the middle of the night. Local production staff, including Carroll, offered to show him the city. They took him up One Tree Hill, one of Auckland's volcanic peaks, a place spiritually significant to the Maori people. Carroll impressed the band so much that they hired him for the remainder of the tour. When it wrapped, he flew to Dublin and became Bono's personal assistant, growing especially close to Bono and his wife, Ollie Hewson. He was scouting locations for the Joshua Tree photo shoot when tragedy struck. A car pulled out in front of him on that rainy night. Carroll, riding Bono's motorcycle, slammed into the side of the vehicle. He died on impact. "It was a devastating blow," Bono told Rolling Stone. "He was doing me a favor. He was taking my bike home." Bono, Ali, Larry Mullen Jr., and other U2 associates accompanied Carroll's body back to New Zealand. They attended his traditional Maori tangi, a 3-day and 3-night wake that profoundly affected them all. Greg Carroll's funeral was beyond belief, Bono recalled. He was buried in his tribal homeland as a Maori by the chiefs and elders. Your head could be completely turned around, and ours were again and again. The Edge explained the impact. Greg was like a member of the family, but the fact that he had come under our wing and had traveled so far from home to be in Dublin to work with us made it all the more difficult to deal with. The band returned to recording with heavy hearts. The album would be dedicated to Greg's memory. Between June and July 1986, U2's recording sessions were interrupted twice, first for the Conspiracy of Hope benefit concerts for Amnesty International, then by Bono's decision to see something with his own eyes. During the Amnesty tour in San Francisco, Bono met René Castro, a Chilean mural artist who had been tortured and held in a concentration camp for 2 years. Castro showed Bono a wall painting in the Mission District depicting the ongoing oppression in Chile and Argentina under US-backed dictatorships. Inspired and disturbed, Bono and Ali traveled to Nicaragua and El Salvador in July to witness the civil wars devastating Central America. What they saw changed him. "I witnessed some things in Salvador which were really unspeakable," Bono later told NPR. "We witnessed a firebombing in rebel-backed territory, watching people's livelihoods get exploded, and feeling the ground shake. Seeing bodies thrown out of cars on the side of the road. Watching foreign policy work itself out in a small country." In El Salvador, they met members of Comadres, the Committee of the Mothers Monsignor Romero. These were women whose children had been disappeared by the Salvadoran government during the Civil War. At one point, Bono, Ali, and a camp worker were shot at by government troops while delivering aid to farmers. The shots were a warning. In a church, Bono saw a mural depicting President Ronald Reagan as the Pharaoh. with Central Americans as the fleeing children of Israel. When he returned to Dublin, Bono famously told The Edge, "Put El Salvador through your amplifier." By August 1986, sessions had moved to Windmill Lane Studios in Dublin. The band was working on Where the Streets Have No Name, a song The Edge had demoed on his own, built around a simple chord progression that any beginning guitarist learns on day one. But simple proved devastatingly difficult. The song had complex time signatures and tricky chord changes that didn't come naturally to the rhythm section. Daniel Lanois pulled out an old-school blackboard and used a pointer like a college professor, walking the band through the changes. "It was ridiculous," Lanois laughed. Brian Eno estimated that approximately 40% of the time spent on the entire album was dedicated to that one song. With every hour, his frustration mounted. The song started to sound worse to him, not better. Finally, Eno had had enough. According to Flood, tape operator Pat McCarthy left the room to make tea. When he returned, Eno had the tape machine ready to record over the song, effectively erasing it. McCarthy had to physically restrain Eno to prevent it from happening. It was a bit of a tongue twister for the rhythm section, with strange bar lengths that got everybody in a bad mood, Lanois recalled. The song survived, but barely. It would become one of U2's most iconic tracks. Recording wrapped in November 1986, but one crucial element remained: the album's visual identity. The working title was still The Two Americas. Graphic designer Steve Averill conceived the cover as representing where two civilizations meet. Desert meets civilization. In mid-December, Averill, photographer Anton Corbijn, and the band boarded a bus and embarked on a short road trip through Death Valley, Zabriskie Point, the Mojave Desert, and the ghost town of Bodie. On the evening after the first day's shooting, Corbijn mentioned to Bono that he loved a tree called the Joshua tree, hardy, twisted plants that survive in the brutal desert. The next morning, Bono declared that the album should be titled The Joshua Tree. During a spontaneous 20-minute photo session at Zabriskie Point, Corbijn captured the iconic cover image: four serious-looking Irishmen against a stark desert landscape, photographed in black and white. The location was actually more than 200 miles from Joshua Tree National Park. Different cover images were created for different formats. The original CD used a blurry, distorted photo, while the cassette used a clear but alternate shot. The deliberate experimentation reflected the band's ambition. The actual Joshua Tree photographed for the sleeve fell around the year 2000, but the site remains a pilgrimage destination for U2 fans. Tragically, a couple died trying to find it years later. March 9, 1987. The Joshua Tree is released simultaneously on vinyl, cassette, and compact disc, one of the first major albums to launch on all three formats at once. Record stores in Britain and Ireland open at midnight to handle the crowds. Island Records had launched a massive promotional campaign. The first single, With or Without You, was released on March 16th, with U.S. radio stations allowed to play it starting March 4th at 11:30 a.m. sharp, with stern warnings against playing it earlier. The gamble paid off spectacularly. The album topped charts in over 20 countries. In America, it climbed to number 1 and stayed there for 9 weeks, remaining on the chart for 103 weeks total. In Switzerland, it reached number 1 and stayed there for 33 consecutive weeks. With or Without You became U2's first number 1 single in America, topping the Billboard Hot 100 for 3 weeks. I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For followed it to number 1. Suddenly, a band that had never cracked the U.S. top 10 had back-to-back number 1 singles. Rolling Stone wrote that the Joshua Tree increased U2's stature from heroes to superstars. Critics praised its fusion of spiritual yearning and political consciousness. The album contained love songs, With or Without You, gospel-inflected searches for meaning, I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, political screeds, Bullet the Blue Sky, and haunting tributes to the disappeared. Mothers of the Disappeared. The Joshua Tree Tour began in April 1987 in Tempe, Arizona, the first time U2 performed in stadiums. It became the highest-grossing North American tour of 1987. On March 2, 1988, U2 stood on the Grammy stage at Radio City Music Hall. They won Album of the Year, beating Michael Jackson's Bad, Prince's Sign of the Times, and Whitney Houston's Whitney. They also won Best Rock Performance by a duo or group with vocal. Accepting the award, Bono said, "We set out to make music, soul music. To us, soul music's not about being black or white or the instruments you play or whether you use a drum machine or not. It's a decision to reveal or conceal." U2 were the only act that year nominated in each of the big three categories: Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Album of the Year. The Joshua Tree has sold over 25 million copies worldwide, including 10 million in the United States, earning diamond certification. It remains one of the best-selling albums in history. In 2014, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame and selected for preservation in the National Recording Registry by the U.S. Library of Congress, the only Irish work to receive this honor. But beyond the numbers, the Joshua Tree achieved something rarer. It captured a moment in time, Reagan-era America with all its contradictions, beauty, and violence. It married spiritual searching with political consciousness. It proved that rock music could be both commercially massive and artistically ambitious. The album's influence ripples through decades of rock music. Its cinematic production style, pioneered by Eno and Lanois, became a template. Its blending of American roots music with arena rock opened new creative pathways. Its willingness to address politics without preaching showed how to critique power while maintaining artistic mystery. Most importantly, the Joshua Tree demonstrated that tragedy, personal and political, could be transmuted into art that connects rather than isolates. Greg Carroll's death became One Tree Hill, a hymn to memory and loss. Bono's Witness of War Crimes became Bullet the Blue Sky and Mothers of the Disappeared, songs that gave voice to the voiceless. "We loved him so much," Bono said of Carroll. "We had to fill the hole in our heart with something very, very large indeed." They filled it with one of the greatest albums ever made. The desert year had yielded unexpected fruit. 4 Irishmen went searching for America, both its myth and its reality, and found something more profound. A way to channel heartbreak, political awakening, and spiritual hunger into 11 songs that still resonate nearly 4 decades later. The Joshua Tree stands as a testament to what happens when artists refuse to look away from darkness, but also refuse to surrender to it. When they honor the dead by creating something that lives. When they take tragedy and turn it into transcendence.